Houses pulled down in mudslides, damaged roads and bridges, and floating cars. The scenes from Yangtze River area repeat now at the Yellow River as the third wave of flooding arrives. Flood level rising despite no heavy rain, indicating that something else was behind it. And in a county with 0 flood-related deaths, falling into floodwater and drowning was instead counted as an accident. Conflicts between Chinese citizens and authorities are rising. Offices of a private firm were demolished by a state farm illegally. The police behavior led to protests. A young Uyghur man published a video of himself in detention in Xinjiang region, and now he is missing. And the U.S. is purging untrusted Chinese apps. The next is WeChat and its parent firm Tencent. This ban may be bigger than TikTok's. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. After 3 days of heavy rainfall, the Yellow River's third flood wave this year formed on Thursday night. In the middle of the river, its water flow exceeded 5,000 cubic meters per second. An online video showed the dam inside Shanxi Province's Lunan County released the flood. Roads and bridges were damaged while cars were washed away. On Thursday, a mountain torrent in Longnan City inside Gansu Province led to mudslides. Roads sunk, villagers' houses collapsed, and cars were swallowed up by mud. The same day, a violent storm hit Xi'an, a city in Shanxi Province. The water there was over waist deep, and locals were wading through it. In some places, cars are still able to drive, but they more closely resemble boats. China's Central Meteorological Observatory issued a yellow-level rain warning on Thursday. And on Friday and Saturday, heavy rain accompanied by strong winds and thunderstorms struck parts of several provinces. They include Gansu, Shanxi, Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guangxi. As for the Yangtze River, its water level near Wuhan dropped to just under 90 feet on Friday, a level slightly lower than the area's overflow warning level. That's following a full month where the water level exceeded that level. Falling into floodwater and drowning. In China, this kind of incident won't be counted as a flood-related death, but as an accident. Last month, flooding in Xinjiang City, located in the eastern Chinese province of Jiangxi, the damages impacted 300,000 people. A Chinese state-run media outlet reported that on July 8th, Mr. Jia, a local farmer in his 60s, noticed rainfall getting heavier and heavier. He then decided to take his grazing cattle home. But just then, flooding from a nearby lake rushed in unexpectedly. Without warning, a 3-foot wave knocked Mr. Jia down. He disappeared into the muddy water. 4 days later, the county authorities notified the public that they would release floodwater from nearby lakes due to the continuously rising water. The lake near Mr. Jia's village was one of them. Mr. Jia's children then started to piece together what could have happened at the day their father was killed. They had been wondering where the large wave came from. During the floods they endured in the past, the local water level rose much more slowly. They began to realize that the lake's dam must have been opened to discharge water 4 days ago, something authorities did without warning local villagers. This is what caused the wave. Mr. Jia's body was found 9 days later, but the county's propaganda department claimed that no deaths had been recorded since the start of this year's floods. As for Mr. Jia's death, authorities said he fell into a pond by himself and drowned while tending his cattle. The flood came after he drowned. They emphasized that his death was an accident. Now, 1 month later, authorities lowered their flood emergency response from level 2 to level 3. And the water level of the Yangtze River is slowly receding. But for many people, life cannot and will not return to the way it was before. In one area in southern China, some locals lost their business to sharply rising floodwaters. But there was no heavy rain at that time, and they suspect it had to do with the local authorities. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
In China's southeastern Anhui, areas around the lake were seeing its water level rise even without heavy rain. A local resident said one day in late July, the water level shot up to his chest level within hours.
I was in my factory at the time, but I did not even have time to move out my machines. The water level rose too fast in 2 hours.
Mr. Chen suspects the local authorities discharged floodwaters without telling them.
If they did not discharge floodwaters, how come the water level went up so fast within such a short time? It's impossible.
He had no other choice but to leave his machines behind.
They were submerged in water and ruined.
The following week, there was barely any rain in the area, but the water level kept rising. Business owners who suffered from the flooding went to the local authorities asking for compensation. Officials said they hadn't discharged any floodwaters and that the flooding was caused by mountain torrents in nearby areas. Locals weren't convinced.
Us commoners know very clearly that this is not a natural disaster. The water comes from discharged floodwaters, but the government just won't acknowledge it.
He said the local authorities also played with the terms to avoid having to compensate them.
When we ask for compensation, the local government insists it's a natural disaster. By saying that, they mean there won't be any compensation after.
The flooding started to recede in early August, but slowly. In some areas, toxic algae emerged and the water began to smell. Lee said locals who lost their shops to floodwaters are now selling on the street, trying to make some money. And another round of heavy rain is expected to hit the area. Xiaohua Gu and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Relatives say a young Uyghur man has disappeared after publishing a video of himself in detention in China's Xinjiang region. On Tuesday, the BBC published a video showing 31-year-old Uyghur model Murden Gapper handcuffed to the bed, with his ankle swollen and wearing dirty clothes. In the background, a loudspeaker was announcing propaganda messages denouncing so-called separatist forces. His aunt helped him send the video out of the country. Now his uncle told Radio Free Asia that both are now missing. Gapper told his family through messaging app WeChat that he was detained together with over 50 people in a small room, and everyone was wearing what was called a 4-piece suit: a black head sack, handcuffs, leg shackles, and an iron chain connected to cuffs to the shackles. A Uyghur activist told NTD that Gapper's situation was probably not the worst. He said the young man was not even in a real concentration camp.
I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. He can still use his phone to take videos. That means he is in a kind of transition center or temporary detention center. He is not yet in a concentration camp or a prison. In the concentration camp or in prisons, we know that there are no phones at all. The inmates will have their heads shaved and wear uniforms. How could they take photos like him and even use phones to send out messages? He is one of the lucky ones.
Rights groups and experts estimate more than 1 million ethnic Uyghurs have been kept in internment camps for political indoctrination. The Chinese regime says that the facilities are vocational schools. Before police asked him to return to Xinjiang late last year, Gapper worked as a model in the southern province of Guangdong. Families say that to further his career, Gapper had been told not to reveal his Uyghur ethnicity, and instead should refer to his facial features as half European. Chinese police have reportedly injured many workers and villagers in a conflict. That's as they were trying to protect the property of a local private business. Early Tuesday morning, some State Farm workers were secretly demolishing the offices of the Dawu Group with excavators and cranes. Dawu Group is a privately owned company in Baoding City inside northern China's Hebei province. Recently, a conflict over land with a local state-run farm has been escalating. As soon as Dawu employees and other locals noticed what was happening, they gathered to try and stop the demolition. That's when the police, armed with full gear, arrived. But instead of helping the villagers stop the destruction, they began trying to disperse the crowd using pepper spray and tear gas. They also beat up the company's employees and villagers. One Dawu employee had a broken rib, and many injured villagers and employees were sent to the hospital. That afternoon, people gathered in front of the local police station to protest against police brutality. But again, they were suppressed. The conflict between the Dawu Group and the state-run farm has lasted a decade. An article published on the Dawu Group's website in June accused the state farm of illegally occupying more than 300 acres of villagers' land. The private company has been trying to negotiate on behalf of the villagers, but to no avail. Dawu Group was established in 1985. In a mere 10 years, the group is on the list of China's top 500 private enterprises. It's also been awarded with various honors and titles. Its business has expanded from food and agriculture to tourism, education, and healthcare, and employs thousands of staff members. Sun Dawu is the founder of the group, but despite the glory of his business, local authorities never liked that he was both a successful businessman and a free thinker. And as early as 2003, local police blocked the group's website after it published 3 articles discussing Chinese democracy and concern about the country's future. Later, Sun was sentenced to 3 years in prison. A senior manager from Dawu Group called it authorities' revenge. President Trump taking another step to protect the security of U.S. citizens. Social media apps TikTok and WeChat have well-known ties to the Chinese regime. The president is banning transactions with both apps from September 20th.
President Trump issued executive orders to ban transactions with video sharing app TikTok and social media app WeChat. The executive order calls it aggressive action to protect U.S. national security. The ban will come into effect in 45 days after the order and will include both parent companies, Chinese-owned ByteDance and Tencent Holdings. President Trump issued the orders under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the National Emergencies Act. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross will define the transactions covered by the prohibition. Both orders noted that the apps automatically capture vast swaths of information from its users. This potentially allows, quote, the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information, unquote. Under a Chinese law introduced in 2017, Chinese companies have an obligation to support and cooperate with the party's national intelligence work. This means sharing information with the regime. Such information captured from users include internet and other network activity information, such as location data and browsing and search histories. According to the order for TikTok, the holders of this information would be able to track the locations of federal employees and contractors, as well as use personal information for blackmail and conduct corporate espionage. A researcher in March last year found a huge Chinese database that contains billions of WeChat messages sent from users in the United States and other countries. Also on Thursday, the U.S. Senate voted to approve a bill banning federal employees from using TikTok on government-issued devices. It received unanimous support. A combined House and Senate version of the bill will go to the president to be signed into law.
Now we turn to China's controversial hand in major social media platforms. We met up with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to find out more about video sharing app TikTok's ties to the communist regime. Hi Annie, thanks so much for joining us again. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiff, for having me.
So TikTok has been in the news a lot recently, and President Trump just issued an executive order last night addressing the concerns about the video sharing app. So what are these concerns?
So the main concerns is drawing from the fact that TikTok is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. The concerns are mainly that because it is owned by a company in China, even though it is a private company, it may be beholden to the Chinese Communist Party's interests. So this could translate to the potential for American user data to be exploited for espionage purposes, or that content that Americans put on the app can be censored because the Chinese Communist Party deems them politically sensitive.
So you mentioned the parent company ByteDance has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. What is the evidence for that?
Yes, so the Epoch Times obtained a set of documents among which it shows that ByteDance has a Chinese Communist Party committee at its Beijing headquarters with at least 138 members in it. So in China, essentially all major Chinese companies will have a party unit in order for the party to ensure that business policies or their staff toe the party line.
So you mentioned the ByteDance has ties to the CCP, and so what does that mean for censorship, having party members involved in a company?
Yes, so even though TikTok is based in America, it's an international platform, there have been a few instances where users reported that their content was blocked after they put it up. One of the most prominent examples is of a young woman who was explaining about the persecution of Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region of China. This video was blocked soon after she put it up, and so there are examples of this where the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want people to know about the persecution in Xinjiang, so this American's user content was taken out.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie.
Thank you, Tiffany.
President Trump is banning U.S. transactions with Chinese tech giant Tencent in one of its social apps. Tencent has major investments in large global companies across the car, music, video games, and social media industries. It also has business dealings with Hollywood movies.
President Trump has issued an executive order banning U.S. transactions with Chinese messaging app WeChat and its parent company Tencent. The Trump administration has been ramping up efforts to purge untrusted Chinese apps from U.S. markets, calling Tencent, WeChat, and TikTok significant threats to national security. The order could potentially be a bigger deal than the TikTok ban. Tencent is one of the world's largest tech companies. It has ownership stakes in a variety of companies, including electric car maker Tesla, music streaming app Spotify, and social media app Snapchat. It holds majority ownership of the studios behind popular video games Clash of Clans and League of Legends. Tencent Pictures, its production company, is involved in major Hollywood movies like Wonder Woman, Venom, and the upcoming Top Gun Maverick. Tencent has a $1.5 billion deal with the NBA to stream its games in China. The ban doesn't mean that all these services will be terminated in the US. It's not clear yet what specific transactions will be covered, but doing business with Tencent just got more complicated, and many business deals are at risk of falling through. The order takes effect on September 20th. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is set to identify transactions covered by the order. Tencent shares fell as much as 10% before recouping some of its losses in afternoon trade.
The U.S. imposed sanctions on Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam and 10 other officials for their role in cracking down on political freedoms in the territory. The U.S. Treasury Department said that as Chief Executive, Carrie Lam is directly responsible for implementing China's draconian national security law in Hong Kong. The law has brought the suppression of freedoms and democratic processes. The sanctions freeze any U.S. asset of the officials and generally bar Americans from doing business with them. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement, the Chinese Communist Party has made clear that Hong Kong will never again enjoy the high degree of autonomy that Beijing itself promised to the Hong Kong people and the United Kingdom for 50 years. President Trump has made clear that the United States will therefore treat Hong Kong as one country, one system, and take action against individuals who have crushed the Hong Kong people's freedoms. Australia's Prime Minister Morrison says the possibility of a U.S.-China war is no longer inconceivable, and that stronger Indo-Pacific alliances with like-minded nations is a critical priority for Australia. Secretary Pompeo reaffirmed earlier the United States policy is crystal clear. The South China Sea is not China's maritime empire. On July 13th, he first declared the CCP's claim that most of the South China Sea is completely illegal. China claims 90% of the potentially energy-rich South China Sea, but Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam also claim parts of it. About $3 trillion of trade passes this water channel each year. Xi promised the U.S. that China would not militarize the South China Sea, but in recent years the CCP has turned the islands there into military bases. And tension is still increasing as China conducts frequent military exercises in the surrounding waters. Now we take a look at the reaction of the countries in that area and countries involved in the issues. The U.S. has increased naval drills in the South China Sea. In July, the U.S., Japan, and Australia conducted joint military exercises there and in Philippine waters. That's after all 10 member states of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, jointly appealed in their June summit. They said China should respect the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The members include Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. One analyst says the joint declaration indicates a major shift in association discourse. So far, India bought new weapons from the U.S., Israel, France, and also Russia. The country also held joint exercises with U.S. Navy in the Indian Ocean last month. Russia's Putin has also taken action. News of Russia suspending the delivery of S-400 anti-aircraft missiles to China appeared on all major medias overnight, citing some pro-Russia explanations. Japan is also actively preparing. According to The Guardian, the Five Eyes, an intelligence organization including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the U.S., intends to invite Japan to its ranks. Japan proposed the same. According to Japanese media, the U.S. State Department has also approved the sale of F-35 jets to Japan, an order worth over $23 billion. Likewise, Vietnam signed an agreement with Japan's International Cooperation Agency and was granted a nearly $350 million loan to build 6 patrol vessels. Indonesia's Navy also conducted drills in the South China Sea in July. The move was viewed as Indonesian opposition to China's assertion of sovereignty over the South China Sea. International forces are clearly assembling to prepare for the worst. A former Chinese military officer said that if the two sides did go to war, America could destroy the CCP's Navy and Air Force in less than a day. Amid the tensions, Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently changed his rhetoric on the subject during a media interview on Wednesday. He said the South China Sea is the common home of countries in that region, and added that China is willing to resume talks on a code of conduct in the South China Sea as soon as possible. A local court in Australia will decide next week whether a lawsuit against a Chinese diplomat will move forward. University of Queensland student Dhruv Pavlo is seeking a court order against Chinese Consul General Xi Jie for inciting violence against him. The 21-year-old organized a pro-Hong Kong rally on campus last summer. He was attacked there and now accuses the attackers of being Chinese agents directed by Xi Jie. Xi Jie issued a statement the following day describing the event as anti-China separatist activities and praising the counter-protesters for their acts of patriotism. The student says he received hundreds of death threats following the attack. Consul generals have limited diplomatic immunity, and Pavlo's legal team is trying to persuade the court that it is not a consular function to praise or incite violence. That would mean Xi Jie's behavior is under the local court's jurisdiction. Pavlo's lawyer, Mark Tarrant, told NTD that if the attackers are proven to be PRC state operatives, the attack will mark the first time since World War II that a foreign power has attacked an Australian citizen on Australian soil. The student advocate recently tweeted that local police found at least one of the attackers was not a student. Pavlo is currently suspended from the university and banned from setting foot on campus for what the institution called serious misconduct. The incident ignited heated public debate over Communist China's financial and political influence on Australian university campuses. Chinese Consul General is an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland. The university is also home to a Confucius Institute, a language and cultural center funded by the Chinese regime. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.